Now, all right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the 2021 series of How Do We Go Forward, How Do We Go Back? My name is Dr. Fen Kennedy. My pronouns are they, them, and I am coming to you from the stolen land of the Creek Nation, now known as Tuscaloosa, Alabama. How Do We Go Forward, How Do We Go Back began as a way for us to think about returning to dance in the fall of 2020. This summer offers us a chance not only to reflect on where we've come from, but to think about how we can change our communities as we move into another academic year. Every week, I invite two guests to have a conversation with me about one element of this broader topic. So after 30 minutes, I will invite everyone to turn on the cameras and unmute, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. This week, the topic is privilege and activism, and we have a trio of presenters. For the first time, we have Julie Brown, Cal Anderson, and Jen Martinez. To give us lots of time for conversation, I am going to do slightly abbreviated bios. The full ones are on the Facebook page. So Julie Brown is a Boston-based blues dance teacher, DJ, choreographer, competitor, organizer, and enthusiastic student. She's been participating in blues dance since 2004, and since has gone on to teach blues dancing around the globe and won many national competitions. Cal Anderson has been working in community organizing on issues of safety and representation for more than 5 years, including as the founder of Queer Trans Figure Drawing and safety coordinator of Boston Blues Dancers. And Jen Martinez has been an avid student of partner dances since 1998 and of blues in particular since 2004. In 2009, she helped start Blues Union and has been a lead co-organizer ever since. Welcome to Julie and Cal and Jen, and I know that you have some questions to get us started with.
Thanks for those lovely introductions.
Yes, thank you, Fen.
Yeah, thank you. Cool. All right. So I know there's a lot of advice out there about things to do with your privilege and kind of how to go about these things if you're privileged, and a lot of that contains stuff about hey, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna make mistakes, it's going to happen. I know we've all been through that at least a few times. So do we want to start by talking about what it's looked like when we've messed up, how we've worked through that, what that experience has been like?
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always think about is separating receiving the feedback and my emotional response of it, because while I'm receiving the feedback, my entire job is to be actively listening, and then I digest it and process it later. And for me, understanding that my job when I'm receiving the feedback is just that I'm receiving it, and that I don't have to figure out what to do with it quite yet, sometimes makes it easier to handle it gracefully, and then I can go process with somebody else who isn't the person who gave me feedback, and also helps me be a more receptive listener, because I'm not also problem solving.
Yeah, that tracks for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that something that naturally trips everyone up is that no one really wants to, for the most part, think of themselves as a bad person. So when feelings are hurt and mistakes are made, all we have is our own perspective on things. That's how we relate to the world. That's how we relate to other people. And it's really easy for us to grasp onto the fact that we know that our intentions were good. We know that we didn't mean to hurt someone. And there are ways that you can use that productively, which means basically not holding on to that knowledge so tight that you get defensive. Good intentions can actually carry you through a mistake. Because if you know your intentions are good and you know you didn't mean to hurt someone and you have hurt someone, then use those good intentions to make it right, to listen to what they have to say, to not use it as a personal attack, but use it as a way to leave yourself open to making the situation better so that you actually can realize your good intentions into a good action.
I think that point is super interesting because I think it also brings up the sort of like defensiveness and guilt and shame, and like where does that come from? And for me, when I'm feeling bad about knowing that I messed up, um like there's the dual like um it sucks that I hurt my friend, and that feels very like tangible, and like it feels bad, but it feels bad in like a really grounded way. And the one that I've tried to like cordon off and like do a little bit of like analysis or unpacking is when that for me that strays into um white guilt, and I feel like, oh, like defensive about having to prove that I'm not like that shitty white person, and like by having to defend it in the first place puts me into a camp of being um like making my white fragility somebody else's problem beyond me, as opposed to just jumping to the like, where I literally step on a friend's toe just at like the sorry, I just tripped up on my words a lot. um Going to like, are you okay? I'm sorry I stepped on your toe, and not, I'm not a toe stepper. um
For sure. Yeah.
Julie, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what y'all are saying resonates with me. Like, I feel like in the moment, obviously, like I also feel like really bad because it usually involves like, oh, I've like hurt someone, and or hurt someone I care about, like somebody who's close to me too, and that like feels really crappy. But like what you're talking about, Cal, where it's like just focus on listening, and especially for me, like listening to understand what's being said to me as well, because there have also been times where I heard feedback, or like I heard some like advice kind of like out in the world, and I was like, oh, okay, that means I should do this thing, and then I misunderstood what was being asked, and then I like just like went off and did that, and then that was a way that I messed up. So like focusing a lot on in the moment, like trying to really understand what's being said, like trying to really hear what's being said, like has also helped not get into like defensive-y feelings. And then like something I'm working on now is like, okay, I think I heard this, like some kind of follow-up about like, is that actually what you meant, before I go and take any action on it. Like actually, that's something I have yet to try out, but that's like my intention for trying to, I guess, do even better about receiving feedback and like taking meaningful and the action that's like meant to be taken, as a follow-up as well.
I think your point about reading something out in the wild, like a blog post or something, as opposed to like a specific feedback directed to you, gets to something that we were talking about when we were prepping for this, about like really letting people be individuals, and like listening for feedback that is specific, or like checking. I'm rambling here, but if either of you have like a smart continuation on that.
The thing that resonates with me is like looking for ways to take action, whether that be stepping back and educating yourself, or like looking for the next step forward. The powerful thing to me is that at some point we all have to understand what privilege effectively means for how we go about in the world. From my own personal example, because I know it's not automatically obvious when you look at me, I am a thoroughly mixed race person of color. I'm Mexican American, and I have a very wide array of experiences. ranging from white passing privilege and all the benefits that come with it to outright racism. And the thing about privilege that most resonates with me is the ability to be silent. When you are privileged and you don't want to engage and you want to step back and just fade in the background and not say anything and not deal with it, privilege lets you do that. Like, it's fine because you have that option. You have that option of like not thinking about it if you don't want to, because it's not a core part of your reality or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think that that actually leads in really great to like another thing that we were talking about when we were prepping, which is like how do we stay in it since we have the privilege to step away and like just not be doing stuff, like how do we all not be like bye. And I know for me, like having accountability like buddies or groups and friends like yourselves that I can, I mean, I know like I have a very like processy thing, which is like once a month I like get together with a couple folks and we're like, here's what we did last week, last month. Like I met my goals, but I didn't. Like we had an accountability group, like a bigger, more official one that Cal ran for a while. Like the three of us organize that. But whether it's like a group or like some small friends, just like the process of we have this on the calendar every month. Here's what I intend to do that's concrete this next month. Here's like what I tried to do. Did I do it? Did I not? Are there kind of roadblocks that I need help getting through, like that? I'd say that's maybe been the most key thing for me, is like just having a built-in check-in. So like, even if I need to do something a little more chill and introspective one month, like I have that process of being able to come back and like revisit if I can do something a little more actiony, a little more concrete, kind of see where I am.
Yeah, my favorite part about our accountability group is the focus on specific achievable goals. Cal calls them SMART goals, and I forget what the acronym is, and I'm sure he has it off of the top of his head.
Fly.
Okay, sorry.
I think it's on the internet somewhere, probably.
It's on the internet somewhere.
Google knows.
Google knows.
Yes, but like the idea of like, especially if you're new to this and coming from like a very privileged position, it can be so hard to know where to start. Or you know where to start, you know, like educate yourself, and that can become this vague like rolling goal that you like never get out of. And at some point you have to like actually start taking actions that aren't reading books and watching videos on the internet. And you know, having people to talk to can really help flesh out like little tiny things that you can do. Because for me, I know that I'm one of those people where, as much as I want to take huge leaps and achieve like big bounding steps and just glide forward with ease, what actually keeps me motivated are a series of small victories. So being okay with like starting small and just achieving that and feeling good about that, and then just trying to like keep that going, and when that feels a little bit easier, get a bit bigger. Or like if you have like, you know, a big lofty thing that you're working on, figuring out how to break it up into manageable chunks and getting excited about the journey and the process is really useful for me.
Yeah, for me, I think the thing that helps me get started when I get stuck, and also is something that I would recommend as a starting point to people who aren't thinking of themselves as somebody who is like currently doing anti-racist actions in their daily life, is to start in community. And one of the things that we're talking about a little bit when we were prepping is that you can like go to your friends who have different experiences and just check in and be like, hey, how are you? Like, I know that you walk in the world differently. You know, do you need anything from me? Or like, you can broach an awkward conversation of like, we have like a privilege disparity that is racialized in our friendship. Like, are there ways that I can support you better? Um, and then really being down to like listen and hear what those are. And yeah, it's going to be awkward the first time you talk about it, but it's going to get less awkward. Um, and I think it's different to go to a specific friend. And I'm not saying like go to every random Black person you know and be like, what can I do for you? Because
Please
that's
don't.
a really awkward thing. That's like a different kind of awkward. But to people that you're like meaningfully already in community and relationship with, you can turn to your friends and ask them what they need. And like similarly, I've had people who've done that for me as a trans person and who are like, hey, like, um, you know, here's what we did about gender at this event. Like, did it work for you? Um, and there's times when I've been like, no, but now we can talk about it. And that's been an awkward thing to do, but also much less bad than not being asked at all. And so, like, I extrapolate that for some people of other experiences that being asked might be able to accomplish something.
Yeah. That like strikes such a strong chord, because the other thing about privilege that always strikes me is the assumption that you will be seen as an individual whose identity lines up and is dictated by how you see yourself. And it is incredibly validating for someone who does not always have that, when like, you know, people like do gut checks with me. Like Cal is great about this, and just like, you know, checking in on like, you know, how I feel as like a person of color, as a queer Latina, like how, like all these things, like it feels really validating, and can take an experience that is difficult and painful and othering and suddenly make you feel very cared for, as an individual.
No. Yeah, I think that one of my like core values as a person is community and the work that I've done, art organizing and also dance organizing and also to a certain extent with my like art itself, that um what I try and come back to is like uplifting the people around me with the tools that I have with an eye towards people who are going to be uplifted less. Um, one time I was in a communal like art crit or a figure drawing session or something, and this um, white guy, as we were all walking out, said this thing where he was like, I just don't understand people that make art that doesn't make people uncomfortable. Like, that's so boring. Um, and I've held that so close to me as like that smacks of privilege, and I want nothing to do with it. Since then, this was probably like 10 years ago. Um, and just like so much of what I try and do as an organizer is about like radically and critically trying to make people feel comfortable and welcome. Whether or not I succeed all the time, like that's up for debate. And also, what we're talking about is like how to give and receive feedback and to like think critically about what it means to want to make people feel comfortable. And then sometimes you make people feel more uncomfortable. And what does it mean to go out and try again?
Yeah. I think we're,
I'm
well, I think we're,
curious about, we're wrapping up towards time, so I want to put that on your radar. but something that I can hear you guys touching on is like you all sit in different kind of situations of marginalization in certain ways. And like you have identities that are marginalized in spaces and that are privileged in spaces. How does that intersect with this conversation of activism and privilege? Because in like we're talking about folks who are in some ways really not privileged, but maybe in a like you're, yeah, I think you all understand where I'm coming from.
I think we're all taking a moment to like think and process and try to be coherent and intelligent.
Yeah.
I'm happy to say words, but I've already said a lot of words.
Julie, if you have something to say, I will defer to you. Otherwise, I will start talking.
I'd say go. I'm having a
Yeah,
moment.
I can recognize the wheels is turning face.
Thank you.
I think it's really important. We all have ways where we are privileged, and we all have ways where we are not privileged. And empathy goes a long way and is very useful. But something to be mindful of is that you don't want to equate your experiences with someone else. I know that like I experience racism on a semi-regular basis. I would never compare my experience to a Black trans woman. Like I can only begin to fathom that, but I can use what experiences I do have as a motivation to be open and empathetic, and try to give them the space and the support that they need.
I think also for me, keeping in mind the duality of my own privilege and marginalized experiences helps me feel more balanced when I'm trying to do the work, which isn't to say that you both have to have privilege and marginalization to be able to effectively do the work. But it's sort of like lowers the stakes of risk, I guess, or let me start over. It helps with specifically some of the like white fragility that I was talking about earlier, that if I'm thinking about doing whatever I'm doing as a like way to absolve, all of my ancestors, that is a lot of weight. But if I'm just Cal, who has a lot of different identities, trying to like go out in the world and make it less bad for some folks in my community, and also broadening what I consider my community, something that the three of us were talking about, of the sort of like in-group bias and like who would you take in, like go out of your way to help, and broadening what that means. But what Jen said about empathy, I think, is really poignant. In Gray and Ivy's talk, Gray talked about leaving a dance in tears. And I haven't left a dance in tears due to racism, but I have left a dance in tears due to gender discrimination and homophobia. And I cannot say that I know what it is like to be Gray. But I do know what it feels like to be in my body and to leave a dance in tears. And I can use that empathy of understanding like how crappy it is to be like to really like concretely understand the possibility of how bad it could feel, because it's like the extra layer of like empathy of like really thinking about what it might feel in your body, without assuming that you actually know what it is.
Yeah, another really good thing to process is like who you turn to for what. Julie and I are very, very close. We see each other on a regular basis. We talk to each other and hang out literally like every week, and open up to each other about a lot of things. But as a white woman, there are things that Julie will not put on my shoulders because she doesn't want to, because I am not a white woman. And it doesn't affect how close I feel to her. In fact, I think it ultimately deepens our relationship.
I have a question for you guys about that. How did that start? Like, do you openly talk about that balance, or is it something that Julie, you started like making sure you do? Like, Jen, you're aware of it. Like, how does it like function as far as like awareness within your close friendship?
I think a couple years ago, I'm trying to remember where I first heard this, but somebody said to me, vent in, support out. It might have been Brie, it might have been Dee Delgado at like a Black Lives Matter like workshop-y thing. One of those people I think is where I first heard it. And so I took that and just sort of like was like, okay, that means if I'm having like white feelings about white fragility and stuff, I should process that with another white person. And so like I started doing that, and I forget what it was, Jen, but we were talking about something at some point, and you were like expressing to me, I think, like an experience that you had around like racism. It was some experience that you had that you had shared with me, and I think you asked me a question, and I can't remember the details of it, but basically I was like, oh, I usually don't like I think I like tried telling you a little tiny piece of like some feelings I'd had that I'd processed, so I don't think I was like dumping my emotions on you, but I was like, this is a feeling I've had as a white person, but I usually don't like put that on you because like I'm trying to do this thing where I don't like process my white feelings onto you, my friend who is not white. And I think that's how it kind of came out the first time, was like something sort of like that. Is that what you remember as well?
It's a bit different for me because you know more than I do in this sense. Like, I'm not a mind reader. I can't read your thoughts, and like I don't know everything about your experience. Like, and I'm thankful for this. Like, I don't want to be a mind reader.
That'd be a lot to handle.
That sounds like hell to me.
That'd be a lot to handle.
The thing that really kind of like made me more aware of it and more appreciative of it is you're the reason I know about the white supremacy and me, like, I heard of it before, but you were the first person that I talked to that had actually actually started to work through it. And you're the reason I actually started doing it. And it was because you were able to specifically tell me that like it does address white passing people and like gives them a way to like work through it while also, allowing them to own their experiences, recognize that they are in fact are different than what an actual white person experiences. And in starting to do that, it opened my eyes in ways that I never thought of before. Race is something I've thought of my entire life, but having these languages and these aspects of white privilege that I could take and think about and figure out how I used to my advantage and to my detriment made me like so much more aware and gave me so much of an understanding, not only of myself, but what it like might be to actually be a white person, that it made me more cognizant and understanding of like the kind of dynamic you and I like had developed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That is super cool. I am going to say we are at time. And so I'm going to invite people to turn on their cameras and unmute. But that ended fairly abruptly. So if you three have final thoughts that you would like to share with people, please go ahead and wrap up any last messages that you're burning to get out there, and then I will transition us into the Q&A.
The biggest thing that comes to the tip of my mind is encouraging people to find ways to actually take actions about whatever their privilege is and whatever anti-racism, social justice work you want to do. There's this big thing where it's just it can be easy to fall into steps that are performative and get ripped to shreds for that. And to address that and to try to help people avoid that, I would encourage people to think about how proactive they're being, because to reference Ivy and Gray's talk, a point that I believe Gray made that I absolutely love and just wanted to reiterate and reemphasize is there is a difference between wearing the safety pin and just saying, I am here if anyone is available, and just loudly declaring that and then sitting and doing nothing but wait. And without taking actions to show that you are a person that are trying to do that, that you are actively being a person who is safe and who will go to bat for someone. Actually taking actions that aren't making declarative statements, that is a useful way to try to avoid that performative deadlock.
Yeah, and I would like to add on to that I think that trying and messing up shows more that you're willing to try, and then trying, messing up, and then receiving feedback gracefully, and then working to do better. That little cycle, starting that, and the first thing you can do can be really small. And it can be checking in with your friend who might have had a weird time that was racialized and say, hey bud, are you good? And then later you can be like, was that weird, that thing that I did? And I would say that the letting yourself have the first step be that I'm gonna do something, and that's better than sitting on the sidelines and doing nothing, or a performative statement, which to reiterate what Jen said, is something that you make a statement and then it has no action, no next step that is required of you immediately. It requires other people to ask for your assistance or something. But if you go out and do something, it shows your willingness to get off the bench in a more tangible way. That I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll riff on that just a smidge, which is ideas for getting off the bench. Something that I definitely remember I did in a workshop with Didi Delgado way back was she had us do power mapping, where we think about the different aspects of our lives, where we have power to potentially do change, and then that gave me a lot of ideas for oh, here are places that I could look for actions I could take, to change policies or advocate for things like that. And then from there, my personal process was okay, here are some ideas. What are some kind of calculated risks I can start taking? Because I know something that the three of us talked about when we were prepping was if you have privilege, and I know I've been told this by many people, I think Gray included, you should be losing something, you should be risking something to help to help advocate for change. So kind of thinking from the power mapping, and then okay, in these areas, what risks could I take to kind of stick my neck out for other people, and what advice is already out there, because there's so much advice out there. People are giving us free advice all the time. We just gotta go look at it and try it out. So that's been kind of my process, in case that's helpful to anybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Can we thank Julie and Cal and Jen for a wonderful talk, and thank you for being like honest and vulnerable. It is always interesting to be in circles where people can talk about how they have like messed up. There's a lot of like, here's the advice, here's the good steps, here's the process, and I think a lot of us need to sit down and talk about, I messed up. And these are my limits, and this is what I can't do yet. So thank you for taking us down that road. Everybody, it is time for Q&A, and how we run this is please drop your name in the chat if you have a question, and I will keep note of the order of names and I will pass it down to people in order as we get the questions. So I need to get my little book because sometimes it helps me to write things down. All right. And I see there's one question in the chat already from Leaf. So we will start with them and folks, and then I see more questions. That is it. Right. Leaf, would you like me to read your question or would you like to unmute and read it yourself?
I can read it real quick. I was curious if you, what advice any of you can give for like reorienting or like orienting some of the energy in friend or community groups that like gather around like a specific thing, that have like maybe a lot of privilege to spare towards like actions that support making the world less bad.
I think in sort of an official capacity, something that we've like started trying, but like, you know, TBD on how it goes, is like just trying to encourage this to be a bottom-up thing, like expressing the intent to the group, be like, hey, like, we think it would be really great if we all did this, and maybe this is why, or maybe there's a thing we can all watch together and then discuss. Like, we can't make you do things, like we don't want to make you do things from the top down, but just kind of expressing the intent to like, hey, let's all do this together kind of thing is an approach that I think like we've been discussing and like trying to start lately.
We have also a mutual friend who's put a lot of effort into organizing people politically so that the barrier for entry on different issues is a lot lower. So for instance, he, over this last election cycle, did a lot of work on voter registration and mail-in ballots and outreach and education and things like that. But he used his privilege, both financially, his wherewithal mentally of organization, his ability to drive, to coordinate huge numbers of local Boston people to be able to do this work. So because of his, and like, for instance, he covered the cost of materials for me because I wasn't able to afford it. And there were other people who were able to sort of front some of the money to make this more effective. And so I think really thinking about the ways that, like, if you can scheme together things that you find valuable and important that you would like to share, you can latch on to existing movements, but you can latch onto them in ways that are even more effective because you're organized into a little group.
Yeah, and you don't have to, like, our friend is like absolutely incredible and amazing, which is not to say that if you aren't there, you're absolutely helpless and you have to passively wait. If this is a relatively, like, if you're near the beginning of the journey, I would say try to figure out what your strengths are as an individual, what your skill sets are, what you have to offer, and then what are you interested in? Are you interested in politics? Are you interested in a certain aspect of politics? Are you interested in whatever it is? And then start talking about it. tell your friends about it. Like, tell your community members casually about it. Find other people who like light up and like want to take that journey with you. And you can slowly start to get people that like, you know, not only are you like pooling your resources together, you can start to get ideas, you can be like introduced to other thinkers, other groups. So you don't have to like come at it from a large knowledge base. You just need to be able to use your already existing network and like your strengths and interests.
Yeah, it just sucks less to do it together.
Yeah.
Because the like startup, like you can latch onto somebody else's energy, or like they can give you a little bit of a boost of excitement, or especially between the three of us, I know we share resources a lot, and not having to like start from the ground up figuring out what the lay of the land is. That's with the little accountability group that we've been doing, I think is the thing that I've gotten the most out of, is when somebody else has done some research into something or has tried something and they come and report back about what the experience was, or what is this organization that I've never heard of.
Wonderful. All right, we have more questions. Our next human is Lexi.
Hi, my name is Lexi. My pronouns are she, her. I am a gender-based prevention educator, gender-based violence prevention educator outside of, oh boy, outside of Canada here. And I am a Latin dancer. Really happy to be here. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to mention that I really appreciated, Cal, what you said around radically and critically making people feel comfortable. That's something that I'm also really passionate about, particularly around safer spaces in the dance community. And what I wanted to add onto that and also ask is around the dynamics around positionality on creating safer spaces for those who have experiences with marginalization, and also creating spaces for bravery and discomfort for those who have experiences of privilege. So having those difficult conversations as we are having today, and having that not be something that is shied away from, but is something that is encouraged. And just to add on quickly, Julie, if you have any resources around power mapping, I'd really appreciate that.
Yes, I can do some Googling and make sure that gets to you later.
Wonderful. Lexi, did you have a specific question or was it just a comment?
The question was around balancing creating safer spaces and braver spaces. Sorry if that was not clear.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Yeah, I think, I mean, something that some feedback that we got recently is about having those be like separate spaces, probably. So like the spaces where people with privilege are like kind of wrestling with stuff and like processing things, and like that being probably a separate space from like, we are trying to make this a like chill, nice time for various marginalized folks. That's some feedback that like we got recently, if I've understood it. So it seems like a good idea.
On the bravery front, what I would encourage is to embrace and work to stop fearing the need for nuance. I don't know about other people, but my brain has a tendency to really want to reduce things down into very cut and dry black and white terms. And that, for me personally, has only led to ways of thinking that stop action and curtail bravery and freeze and stop me in my tracks. As a person, I have made the most progress and steps forward and acts of bravery in embracing the shades of gray that life actually is. And particularly when you're trying to find a way to do better for groups that you're not part of, you could, and this is something that we have done as an organization, start doing something that one specific marginalized person says that should be done, and you do it, and you might hurt another marginalized person in that same group. And rather than like throw up your hands and go, this is impossible, I can't make everybody happy, that's true. But if you add more nuance, if you like tweak it and adjust it so that it's still true to what you were originally trying to do, but leaves more space for other opinions, it goes a long way.
And actually,
I
then
think
maybe
that'll-
go ahead.
Oh.
Sorry. There's a little
I
tag
think-
on, but you go.
I think that ties into what Gray elucidated so beautifully in the talk that Gray and Ivy had about really making sure that the most marginalized people are supported. And for people who are used to privilege, a room that isn't catered very, very specifically to them might feel uncomfortable. But so like, I guess the thing that I would say is to like actively seek the comfort for the marginalized people and think about intersectionality and the multiply marginalized people. And like what Gray was saying about, you know, if a space is good about Black trans people, they're probably good about white trans people. Lost my whole train of thought.
Words are hard.
Words are
I'm going
hard.
to jump in on your train of thought for a minute, if that's okay.
Sure, please.
Because you're sparking, and before we have one more question, and I think Julie maybe wanted to respond on this question, but I also wanted to note that one group of marginalized folks that I know is very present in our community are folks with disabilities. And we have very little conversation about folks with disabilities. And that's what we're talking about next week. We have J6 Feathers and we have Rebecca RG, and the subject is accommodation and disability. And so please, if you're interested in having more of these conversations, please show up for that talk, because we are going to be talking about a group that doesn't get a whole lot of conversation very often, and thinking about how we wrap that kind of marginalization into our consideration of like the broader spectrums and axes of marginalization within our scene. Julie, did you want to continue on with your thought, or Cal, did you find your train?
You know what? I'm happy to have Julie say things.
So, yeah, I'm gonna, based on what y'all are saying, I'm gonna recomplicate that first thing I just said, and say maybe there is a way that within the space, you know, there are interactions that are brave interactions, while also it as a space is being comfortable for the most marginalized people, like being actively made comfortable for the most marginalized people. So I'm going to walk back my initial statement because I think that's better sounding.
Thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate it. This is something that I'm constantly grappling with and working on, and I appreciate you sharing.
Right. And then the last question I have on my list is from Ron. I'm just going to remind people, you can drop your names in the chat and I will get you on my stack. But for now, Ron, did you want to tell us your question?
Yeah, the question is really, how do we use our white privilege? And those of us who are white have white privilege. How can we use it in practical ways to be helpful? I've been at this since I was 10 years old. When my experience with racism was directed at my Little League teammates when I was 10. And I wanted to do something then. And I've always had Black friends and been supportive, but when do you step forward and not let them take the lead? I've always felt I should let my Black friends take the lead and me be supportive and listen to them and helpful. But when do you really step forward? Simple things like when my Black friend is standing at a bar and the bartender's ignoring him. Do I hop up there and order for the both of us? That kind of thing. But it can go farther than that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great to be welcoming and supportive, but where can you really help?
I think that because we're all individuals, there's not a one size fits all solution, which I don't think is what you were
Right.
asking for, but just to like clarify for the whole group. And because the way that I think about equity work is very relational and community based, it's easier for me to answer that question in a way, because the answer to that question, your example of, you know, we're at a bar, I'm there with my Black friend is getting ignored, is that I can check in and ask, hey, do you want me to get this? And so some of the pre-work steps before asking are things that you've already done but can extrapolate to more and bigger scenarios, which are recognizing the power that you have in your sphere of influence, or the power mapping that Julie was talking about. And you can work to expand your own sphere of influence as a person with privilege who's working on equity, but also you can work on bringing people who are currently have a smaller sphere of influence into the power spaces that you have, or turn them over to them. And that's going to look differently from case by case. But those are my immediate thoughts, because there are times when I'm out with a friend, and whether or not it's a question about race or not, where something happens that is about their marginalized identity, and I say, do you want me to do something about this? And sometimes they're like, no. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're like, yeah, I would like some support.
And some other ideas, like maybe if it's a situation where like it's not your friend, or I don't know, like it's in some kind of public situation. I know Cal actually facilitated a group of us taking a training with Hollaback, which is like bystander intervention stuff. And there's some kind of like general tactics that if you're witnessing something, one of the things you can do is check in with the person, like either during or after. But there's also like addressing the behavior directly, like recording it. Like they have a series of like concrete options that you have. So I would definitely recommend that, like bystander training for those.
Free to donation based. I really enjoyed their trainings, would recommend.
And as a single like point, one individual perspective as a non-white person, what always feels best for me is when people check in with me and see what I'm feeling and what I need in a situation. It makes me feel very seen. It makes me feel very cared for. And for me personally, it's very obvious when I'm trying to say something, but I can't for one reason or another. And it's can be very validating to hear someone else recognize that, you know, an offensive thing or action that happened was said, and like try to, you know, get it out in the open. That is very particular to me, and it does not apply to everyone. But, you know, basically it comes down to seeing people of color as individuals and figuring out how to genuinely step in and take care of them, because it is going to vary wildly for
Yeah.
the person, for the situation.
Wonderful. Thank you. We had, I think, one more question / comment from Sarah Cheney. Did you want to say things?
Hi guys, it's me. Sorry I had to pop on a little bit late today. I wanted to come back to what y'all were all talking about the discomfort for the folks with privilege, and kind of ideas about how to get started in taking action. And actually causing tiny amounts of discomfort has been something that I have been very successful at over the past several years. I know that for some of you, my existence makes you uncomfortable, but the thing that I have started doing is, so like Cal was saying, when you are doing things together, you've got a community of people to boost you and help you with your activities, but also you want to normalize these activities for the whole population, that this is normal and it's cool. And so what I found myself doing, especially I had broken my hand last year and I would go to OT and she'd be like, well, what do you do? What'd you do today? And I would say, oh, I did phone banking for XYZ issue. And I did, I'm doing social media monitoring. So I talk in an excited way because I am excited about the work that I'm doing. And so you get social power. And I think this is what we're talking about with like your spheres of power. Like you change that message and you expand and you send it out and you see that it's normal and that it's cool and it makes you happy. And then other people who may not be taking any of those steps see that way. And so I think that you can kind of take many, many small steps and then they add up to like a nice big leap forward. So for those of you that are maybe newer at this or feeling nervous or feeling like you can't have big steps, you just take a lot of little ones and it will work out.
Yeah, that's similar to the tactic I took with when starting to broach this with my family, was just like in our normal, like, what have you been up to conversations, just saying those things. Also, my dad is funny. And one thing that actually, my dad, that's true. He, the past several years, when he would be ending a phone conversation with someone, in like support or something where they're like, oh, is there anything else I can help you with today? He would say, well, I think we really could use a new president. Do you think you could help with that? That's my dad.
That is awesome. I'm also vividly reminded of our conversation partnering and gender, and it was like, what's what Mark Carpenter says, you want to get people to switch roles more, make it cool, make the cool people do it. Like when the people with social power start doing a thing, because if you rely on all the kind of like nervous marginalized kids in the corner to do a thing, like it doesn't happen very much. But if you get a couple of like socially high powered adopters, suddenly everyone wants to do what the shiny people are doing.
I want to dig in on that just for a second, because I think that's a really great elucidation of like social capital and power, and like what it means to have privilege and then to use it constructively. And so there are times when what it means to use your privilege is to actively give up something because you have the ability to give up the thing to make a situation more equitable, like the radical redistributing funds in a community or in a country. But it can also mean intentionally choosing a choice that is a radical and inviting choice without thinking that you then get praise for doing it. Like that's the flip side, is that because you have all this power, this is now the bare minimum. And if you can bring yourself to do a ever increasing bare minimum, that's my own goal for myself, is for where I'm at to feel sustainable and then to strive for a slightly larger bite of this kind of work.
Yeah. My 2 cents on the matter are to address discomfort. I'm very used to discomfort. And I'm used to discomfort because I actively sit with it, and it is something I practice all the time. If you are not, and you are a person who is sitting in a lot of privilege and are trying to figure out how to tap your foot into it, I believe we're all dancers here. So at one point, we all knew what it was like to be a beginner and to be not good at this skill. And the way you do it is you practice and you adapt an enthusiastic learner's perspective. And if you go into this kind of work with that mindset, eventually your discomfort will either lessen or you get more comfortable being uncomfortable, depending on like your personality and how it works. Either way, if you keep at it and stay open, it will get easier.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up, and we are at time. So everybody, please join me again in thanking Julie and Cal and Jen. You have been absolutely fantastic, and you've done so much wonderful stuff for us today. I am going to pause the recording. I invite you to stay and just breathe out with me. But one more time, this is how do we go forward? How do we go back? Thank you to our three presenters.